all the king's horses and all the king's men. A fictional short story by Jonathan J. Gagan. If all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again, then who am I to try to bend the universe to my will? Schizophrenia is a disease that passes like a virus from its host from one generation to the next, and thus leaves future generations without a means to their dreams, as no cure yet exists. I had hoped to be the exception to that disease, and that I was adopted. But when the onset of psychosis hit me, all the white middle-class privilege of youth could not help me to ascertain the one thing I had always wanted: sanity. And more than air, and more than any rational dream a man could hope for on this earth, I wanted that for me and my mother. Who could love a man whose dream and purpose in this life, his very future, had been swept out from underneath him like a seismic wave collapsing a man's last free breath, and sealing his fate like a ball of yarn that could never be unraveled, stuck deep in his throat? That's absolutely horrifying, mortifying, and terrifying beyond what a sane person can imagine when he imagines that which fear is. And fear that is greater than fear is oppression and dominance and magnitude on a scale of unpredictable velocity in a man's life, and it is genetic, and hope is not. I came out of the 7-Eleven raving mad. My psychosis was stark crazy. Somehow I had blood on me. I must have cut myself on the refrigerator glass door. The police pulled up in cruisers. I was smiling then, but I hadn't showered in months. I kept ranting about God and his plan to upset the harbingers of death. I had to tell them, so I screamed out to the officers. They were both wearing blue rubber gloves. So I say, the harbingers must save the children from Aswala, our God. The handcuffs clicked behind my back as the nice officer pushed me in the back to get me to move towards the cruiser. Shut the fuck up, shut up, he said, and that's when everything went fuzzy. I woke up on a slick blue mattress in a large empty room that smelled like urine. It was a quiet room. The psych tech looked up from his clipboard where he was charting, and he smiled. This was a different kind of smile. My head was groggy. I thought they gave me something during one of the flashes. You need help sitting up? I smiled a begrudging smile, but my face remained flat and emotionless. They had sedated me. Then I heard somebody yelling out in the hallway about getting the right paperwork. He was being restrained when I walked out the door. They had a breakfast cart sitting out. Eggs, a piece of bacon, and some toast, with a juice and those jelly cups I like to spread over with my butter. My mom had done it like that when I was a kid. She had died about 3 months back. She had a car crash while driving home from work. She was a CNA. Before I walked into the day room, I looked over at the big locked safety door and then down the hall at the other doors. They were all designed special so that you couldn't hang yourself with bed sheets, belts, or shoelaces or something like that. It was really a quiet morning except for the guy in the corner who was muttering to himself about something to do with his aunt. It sounded personal, so everybody pretty much left him to do the dirty work himself. He must have really hated what she did to him. I don't want to say, but he said some things. I sat down in one of the weighted safety chairs. They were built so that you couldn't pick one up and throw it like in a tech or nurse, the doctor, or at some window and break out. Not that you could go to Wendy's in blue scrubs and a pair of jeans. Guy in the corner, if you're wondering who I'm referring to. He just looks sketchy, that's all I'm saying. A couple of guys were sitting around these gray tables playing spades and chatting about baseball. Pretty normal, except this 18-year-old kid who just wanted his mother's attention kept interrupting and monopolizing the conversation. The one guy kept getting pissed at him. He didn't need to say anything. I could see the involuntary tick in his left eye every time the kid said basically. Tardive dyskinesia was a bitch. More selectively, this other guy with biker tattoos, who seemed like he had a head injury or something, was downwind of me and farted. Another guy yelled, "Man!" and he pulled up his t-shirt to cover his mouth and nose. Then he went over and started lining coffee straws and emptying the sugar packets on the tabletop. The social worker walked in and a bunch of guys started to hound her about when they were going to get out or where they were going to go. I didn't have anywhere to go, so I figured I'd let fate decide. I had been living with my mom until her death, and then I was homeless. I had been sleeping under a viaduct and had met this guy, Jimmy, who helped me out. He was also smoking meth and told some pretty horrifying stories about places like the one I was in now. Surprisingly, the social worker walked up to me and she said, "Charles Sabergan?" I said, "Yeah," getting up. I put my tray down. I had eggs on my face. The cut on my hand was bandaged rather well, with some tape and medical gauze. We went into a small room and she sat at one end and pulled out the chair for me. I sat in it. She checked the time on her watch and then got right down to business. "You were living with your mother, weren't you, Charles?" I nodded. I didn't really feel like saying much. She continued, "That is until she died 3 months ago in a car crash, is that correct?" I felt the anxiety again in the policeman's voice. I did that thing with my finger where I nervously nudged my eyebrow and raised it and flicked my head, speaking into the corner to somebody. "Yeah," I said. She continued, "I talked to your mom's brother, Ed. You know him, right?" I just twisted my head and looked up at the wall, still muttering gibberish. I could hear her fine. She wasn't caught off guard 1 second of the conversation. This wasn't unusual behavior to her. She'd probably seen it a million times. She continued, "It says here you broke a window. Oh, I'm sorry, refrigerator door at a 7-Eleven. The store manager still hasn't decided whether to press charges or not. But the police are talking with him to sort things out. Do you want a juice cup or something?" I had dry mouth. It was a side effect of one of the meds. "Yeah," I replied. She got up and stepped out for a minute to talk to the psych tech, who handed her a juice cup. Then sitting down, she set it in front of me. I opened the thin foil top. It had this crinkle to it that looked pretty in the morning light coming through the door. There were no windows. Continuing, she said, "It looks like you don't have any priors, so that's good. I need you to sign there and there." She handed me some paperwork and a pen. I signed on the dotted line. She smiled, then went back to talking. "I'm going to see about getting you placement." At the time, I didn't really understand what placement was. Then she ushered me out the door, and the next guy came in, and as she called his name, and we started groups. It was all pretty repetitive, and I had been through it all before many times since I turned 18. Now I was 34. I had stopped taking my meds this time, and it had cost me. By the end of it all, I had to see a judge who made me pay some fines and slapped a restraining order on me so that I could never enter a 7-Eleven again. I figured that was probably a good thing, except I really would miss my morning brew and those glazed donuts Mom used to buy for me before she'd go to work. She could barely afford the gas or her insurance, but she never failed to make the side trip back home because she knew I liked them. And I always said the caffeine stimulated my creativity. I liked to paint. That's how I made money over the internet besides Social Security. That day, she hadn't come home from 7-Eleven. I got frustrated because I knew something was wrong. Roger, the store manager, and Katie, who worked the register, knew me pretty well. I didn't always say hello, but they knew where I lived in case anything happened. My mom had given them her work cell along with the home phone. Sometimes I'd just hang out up there. Roger let me because, well, he was a nice guy, and he needed somebody to smoke with after his wife divorcing him and all. When I walked out of the hospital, there was a van waiting to pick me up. It said Sunnyside Residential on the side in big yellow and green letters with the logo of a tree. About 2.5 hours later, we pulled up to a flat, one-story building that looked like a nursing home. On the outside were a bunch of people smoking cigarettes. The light poles were kind of Christmas-like, and black illuminating the sidewalk around the place. There were a few trees. We stepped into a waiting room where there was a girl behind the front desk. I signed in and the girl asked me if I had anything metal or glass. I just said no. Then I went into an office and I met this lady who gave me a bunch of paperwork. She said I could go out into the community and that the library was open from 9 to 5 downtown. And they had a good selection of books. She said she had heard that I liked to read. I said, I guess. When I got to my bedroom, it was another one of those slick blue mattresses with a curtain and adjoining bathrooms. I had a roommate. His name was Mark. He came in, told me not to go on his side of the room, and that was that. They had given me a duffel bag and some pajamas and a t-shirt and jeans and said my Social Security would transfer in about 2 weeks. But that I'd get a reduced amount because they had to pay rent or something. A CNA came in and made my bed. We watched the TV together while she did. There were only 3 channels. She was nice. Her name was Jamie. I had a few transfers after that, and I went to a few homes, but got kicked out of all of them for anxious behavior problems. I ended up homeless again and was walking by a train after 3 nights in a homeless shelter. I didn't like it there. As the train went by, exhausted from sleep deprivation and hungry, I rested my head against the tracks and blacked out as I saw a light. The story of the 2019 train crash had made national news, but only for a week. Most people had been okay at the scene. The driver was horrified. He had stopped the train in time to save the passengers, but my head had ultimately been crushed and taken off. They found a bottle of Jack Daniels in my coat pocket and chalked it up to a drunk homeless man. A forensic officer was the last one, other than me, to look down at the donut paper that fell out of my wallet I had saved. My mom gave it to me with the last donut I ever ate from a 7-Eleven that she handed me. The rain washed the blood away, and the train was decommissioned for maintenance. The driver took permanent leave, and by the end of his life, he would feel so much regret for having seen such a traumatic incident that he would shoot himself from PTSD.